Ashtavakra Gita, chapter 1, verse 12. The self looks like the world, but this is just an illusion. The self is everywhere. The self is one, still, free, perfect. The witness of all, awareness without action, clinging, or desire. I would like to again bring this reminder that the sage wants us to experiment. Now, these words of sage are like laboratory, and our inquiry with what sage is saying is experimentation in this laboratory. I have added the link to the playlist in the description where you will find all the verses. So before going into the verse, let us see like what we are seeing in this world, because it's very important for us to see where we are, else it would be more or less like the sage is saying something and our mind would be this is good or this is not good, or we would judge something. So these verses are not for that, not to judge it, not to say it is good or bad. The sage here is the sage is saying all these things for a purpose. And it is very important to see these verses, to be aware of the words of the sage. For that, we will have to see where we are, what we are seeing. From there, we will have to start. Not just for this verse, all the verses of Ashtavakra Gita, we will have to take it that way. Okay? So in this world, what do we see? We see something is happening. So there is something happening, there is someone who is seeing this happening, and there are objects involved, right? The sage is saying self is not any of this. And any of these three is the cause of suffering. There is no relief in any of this. Now, why is the sage saying this? Like, if you inquire this, because we can take many examples, but I don't want to give examples over here, but we can see ourselves that whatever is happening around us would be or might be because of these three things what we discussed right now, right? So is this the cause of suffering to us? I mean, when we are attached to any of these, would this cause suffering? Inquire about it. This wouldn't need any scripture, no, and this is not imagination, no. This is the life what we are seeing. The inquiry starts right from here. And the sage is saying that the cure for this disease of suffering is the self. Self is everywhere. We need to see why the sage is saying this. To whom is these words for? The words of the self is for the ego, because who is incomplete? The ego I is incomplete and it is looking for completion, right? And who is complete? The self is complete. So it is a conversation, or it is like for the ego what the self looks like. Though there is no appearance, but at least for the ego to break its limits, this is very necessary. So the sage is saying these words to the ego. Rather than again assuming that self is this, self is that, let us try to take it the other way around. Let us see how the ego is. Okay? Because if we don't know things, if we try to know that, then it would be more or less like an imagination. Let us break that imagination, because the sage is trying to remove all the false. Right, in the previous verses also we have seen examples where he doesn't want to bring in one more idea on top of many ideas that we have. No, he wants us to remove all those ideas, flush all those ideas and be free. So if we see the ego, how is it? Even if you give everything to the ego, will it be satisfied? Is it still asking for something? Look at this. Look at this. Don't just say that, okay, these are all my 5 checklists. If that is done, I'll be happy. Are you really happy after that? Check this. Check this very truthfully. Not just from tuck, 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 checked it, done. No. Check it very, very, very carefully. Go in depth. So the self is complete and ego is looking for that completion. If this incompleteness was our nature, then we would have been in bliss, in this incompletion. So this is not true, that this incompletion is bliss. So ego is looking for something. The ego is small, it is split and broken. So it is looking into the world for the completion. But what will it get if it is looking in this lens, in this broken lenses? Right? Like we have seen in the previous verse, that what is within is what you see in the world. And to get to achieve this completion, the ego is always in some action. And that to what kind of action? Check it. What kind of action? Is it presumed action, pre-assumed action? Nowadays it is not very difficult to trigger someone. Why? Because we know that if it is like, if you do X, Y, Z, the person is going to get triggered. Why is the ego so surfaced? Let the ego look at the self. The self is not bound by anything. No action is needed because there is no desire to this self to get something. It's already complete. The sage is subtly saying that the fuel to this ego is suffering. And it has its suffering stations where it gets its fuel reloaded and does some action to fulfill its incompleteness. This is the gist of this verse. Check, this action is towards what? And where are these suffering stations where it is getting refueled? Right? So inquire on all these things. Why does ego need someone? Why does it need a partner? Why is it getting bored? What is the completion that it is looking for? And the sage said, the self looks like the world, but this is just an illusion. So again, if we see the ego eye, we have discussed this in the previous verses as well, in one of the verses where we saw like how consumption is the nature of the ego, right? So ego, when we say self, also it tries to bound with a boundary. That's what the sage is saying, that this is just an illusion from the eyes of an ego. And self is something which cannot be consumed. He's just being cautious about it, or he's just signaling us to be cautious and not to take this self also as this world. Because ego can just be an illusion. It can just have boundaries while the self is free. Just feeling like saying this. When you feel from your heart to bow down, just bow down. There's so much lightness in it. Not bowing down to a person or an idol, not just that. When there is an opportunity, like it can also be a person, idol, or a book, or a poem, or a phrase, right? This is love. Ego will fight or might not fight also,